Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and this is my husband and co-host, Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. Today we wanted to announce that we're going to try a live stream coming up. It'll be on Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, 2025. So if you can, grab your margarita and we'll talk some management. Today we would like to ask you for a little bit of feedback. So to make that conversation interesting to you, we're looking for what is currently challenging you at work, either managing yourself or managing others. You can leave them down in the comments section, or you can check the show notes and we'll have a link to where you can leave us some of your ideas for that conversation. Now on to the show. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I am your host, Cindi Baldi, and my co-host, the lovely Geoffrey Tumlin.
Intelligent too. Yellow.
This, I don't mean to marginalize you.
You're
the full package.
I don't want to be subject to the female gaze. Yeah.
You're not an object.
That's right.
I don't think anybody would dare think of you that way.
All right.
Anyway, today on Management Muse, we are going to talk about gossip. We're going to spill some tea. So what is the purpose of it? And then when do we actually have to worry about it? And how do we mitigate it?
Right.
In terms of management.
Right.
This is like a perennial conversation. Like it literally goes on my surveys periodically because some CEO is like, how bad is the gossip here?
Yes. And which our response is usually gossip is good. Healthy sign.
Yep. It is an indicator of a few things. So, I mean, the three main reasons, and this is out of Baumeister's
Baumeister from SSU.
Yeah. There are basically three main reasons why we're prone to gossip. And the main one of them is information sharing, right? Like you don't know what's going on and you're trying to figure it out. And so you're gossiping, trying to get that information.
Yeah.
And then the second is making a connection, social bonding. Sometimes we gossip just so that way it's an opportunity to sort of do that sharing.
Sure.
And they've actually studied this. Gossiping does raise oxytocin levels.
The trust hormone.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
And then the third reason is for moral reasons. It's sort of like the moral regulation of the group. And so to some degree, you do a little bit of gossiping to sort of signal your own values, the values of the group to newcomers.
Yeah. And
sometimes it's also to sort of demonstrate the values that are unacceptable. So we have been in a hospital where let's just say a doctor and a nurse were too friendly and they were both married. And that was the first thing I was told in a survey debrief. And it's because that was just so against their values.
Yeah.
And it was a group of people who felt this way. It wasn't one person. And so, they were gossiping because they told me about this thing that was happening between these two people that I really did not need to know.
Yeah.
But
it's a signal, sending a signal sometimes.
But but basically they're saying this is unacceptable behavior for here. We don't want that. Yeah. And so those are the three reasons why we tend to gossip.
Yeah.
And so when you think about it that way, from an individual level, gossip can actually be a positive.
Yeah. And to the organization.
And from an organizational level, it's really only when you're the focus of the gossip that it becomes dicey as to whether or not it's negative or not.
I think a lot of managers, in addition to that, also feel like gossip is negative when the gossip either trumps their ability to tell them.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. So
we're doing information sharing.
Right.
And then we have a group of managers who are like, we're telling them what is going on and they don't believe us because they heard X from some bonehead who's not in the meetings.
Well, the grapevine, the gossip grapevine doesn't have policies and procedures. And so, people are gossiping about things they have their eye on, things they're worried about, promotions, firings, punishments, etc.
Well, and the social comparison component, they're gossiping because so-and-so gets all this time off, but management, but like this is a different example. This is one of the reasons why it's hard to wrangle. Management is blocked legally and procedurally from telling you why this person, oftentimes, why this person is getting what they're getting.
Yeah, and the process has to play out. And so grapevine isn't waiting. Something bad happens, the grapevine goes into action, chattering about it, and the managers are, then people start coming to their managers, what's going on here? And, I don't know. It's under internal review. I mean, the main point of this episode is, and why it's interesting, is we all the time get managers who view gossip as negative because it's, in their mind, making their job harder. And it actually is in some cases. The gossip's getting the jump on them. There's things that are happening in the organization that the grapevine is fielding with less precision and more inaccuracies faster than they can, and they don't like that. It's throwing off questions to them that they can't answer, and managers don't like that. And it's throwing off also a lot of, red herrings, a lot of goat trails that dilute the focus of what the manager would like it to be. But in the science and also in your work in identifying and measuring organizations, and, more generally, when we stop and think about it, gossip has the positive functions that you identified. It's fast relay of information, helps with the norms, and also enables people to actually feel socially connected to the group. And so in terms of a healthy organization, gossip is a good sign. It's a sign that people are talking and chattering and trying to make sense of what's going on in the organization. But most managers don't like it. Most managers want to know, how do I make it go away? In fact, people, as you mentioned, come up to you and ask in your survey, how do I reduce this? How do I reduce gossip in the organization? And I don't think, I've never done an initiative to reduce gossip. Have you?
Well, inadvertently, yeah. I mean, well, maybe not even inadvertently. I mean, my major recommendation is in the areas. So this is how I would handle it. First of all, you got to start figuring out exactly what the purpose is for the gossip. Like, is it just social bonding, or is it information sharing, or is it that they're trying to impose sort of limits on behaviors based on values? And you can figure that out. If you hear enough of the gossip, you can get the gist of sort of like, the majority of the essence of it, why it's happening. And, if it's information sharing, then the stuff that you can communicate, maybe you need to actually examine whether or not you're doing a very good job communicating it. And the stuff that you can't communicate, there has to be an effort to communicate. Okay, you can't say, look, the reason why Jill has been out for 2 months is because, she's got hemorrhoids. You can't say that. But you can say, look, Jill and I, we've had a conversation. Her and HR, me and Jill, like all of us have had a conversation. She has a good reason for what she's doing. And if you were in her boat, you would want to have the conversation with us, and you would want us to do the same thing for you. And basically, it's more a conversation on policies and taking care of the people and saying, not trust me, because nobody trusts anybody who says trust me, but look, this is how the process works. If it's valid, we're going to make an adaptation. So that way you can do the things that you need to do while still being an employee here. And by the way, Jill is churning out a ton of work at home.
Yeah.
And so, it's thinking through, like, that's the information part of it. It's thinking through Are you communicating the things you can communicate? And are you doing it fast enough? Because you got to get ahead of the gossip. And you're going to have to communicate it in multiple ways because there's just so many channels.
Yeah.
And then for the stuff that you can't communicate, you're focusing on the policies more than the actual specific incident, so they understand the process. And then for the stuff that's social bonding, you can have social bonding that's positive, right? That people are using gossip in a positive way, a constructive way.
Yeah. Yeah, I got an example of that.
Okay, give us an example of that.
A friend of ours who you may know this story, we'll take it into it, but basically the CEO of his company blew up his marriage and then got into a relationship with somebody from China who was 20 years younger than him, and then took the company to China to try to do business in China, and would bring his, I don't know, mistress or whatever, girlfriend to the business meetings. And it was scandalous in the whole company because, basically it was a norm violation. Like, we're not a company where the CEO is off carrying on in a foreign country with his mistress, having just blown up his marriage, with this mistress. And now this unqualified person is in these multi-million-dollar business meetings. And so it ricocheted throughout the company. And you can imagine if you're a senior manager or the CEO, you would hate all that gossip, but it's serving a function. It's actually noise from the company saying,
come back into alignment.
Yeah, there is a violation here. This isn't how we do things. And people are chattering to not only express, their angst and discomfort, but this term that we talk about sometimes, sense making. You're trying to make sense of what's happening. What kind of company do we actually have? I thought we were better than this
I thought we were family oriented.
Right. And, so I'm talking to this person next to me, and then I want to go and I ask my manager about it, and I want to know what my manager thinks. And that's a lot of times, gossip is just is a negative or pejorative label for people talking, or employees talking, staff talking.
Yes, talking about things that you would rather that they generally speaking, rather that they not be talking about, because there's an element of like losing control, right? Like if you lose control over the information.
Right. Yeah.
There's a sense that as a manager, you've lost control. And like, we often hear this about like payroll, like all these companies who are like, oh, no employees should be talking about what they make. And to which I'm like, they should definitely be talking about what they're making, because you should have a pay scale that's fair. Like that should be transparent.
Yeah.
And so that's just an example.
Yeah.
They don't like that. Yeah. They don't like that level of gossip.
And it's insane for anybody. If you're a manager listening to this and you think your people aren't going to talk about pay and punishment and promotion, then the most important thing you can take from this podcast is quit thinking like that. That's nuts.
Right.
Of course people think about that.
Right. There's in that information sharing, I mean, it's a huge bucket, but part of that information sharing lives social comparison.
Right.
So you're gathering the information of how other people are doing and what they're getting away with to assess where you are.
Yeah.
And people need that. I mean, we've had a bigger conversation on that, but generally speaking for this episode, people generally need to know how they're sort of ranking up against another human being, and you're not going to get rid of that.
Right. Yeah. My other problem with obviously HR is important. Years ago in the Army, I had an HR job for a year and some change. HR is important. Lawyers are important. I think that lawyers and HR try to constrain too much what people actually talk about. And
then that's all they want to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's a signal. You're telling me as like the leaders of an organization that I can't talk about what I'm making? What are you hiding?
Yeah. Yeah. It's that. And it's when people are out and people get in trouble. And I understand that in many cases you can't go into the specifics, but you tell people like, look, she's out because of health reasons. And that for most people, or that's a good managerial response.
Or just even more broad, she has legitimate reasons to be. She doesn't. They don't even need to know the health reasons.
Yeah, you can't. So I understand why this is like inside baseball. This is Cindy's background is organizational behavior, and mine is human communication. So like you can talk like that, but then people just go away from the manager and they're like, all right, well, that didn't work. So I'm going back to my gossip. I'm going back to my network channel. I came to my manager to know, boss, what's going on and what do you think about it? And let's stick with this example because it's one that we've brought up a couple times here.
Well, it also comes up all the time.
Yeah, somebody who's out because there's a health reason. But let's say that they have cancer and you know it. They told you, but they ask you not to tell anybody. Fair enough. Totally get it. Somebody comes up and they're like, hey, how much longer is Jane going to be out? I don't know, but I think 2 or 3 more months. Okay, dang, that's a long time. What are we going to do? You tell them the plan, and then they say, because they're curious, you know why she's out. And you say, it's health related. And that's it. And you don't disclose the cancer because she asked you not to disclose that. And that is a good managerial response. Your person goes back away. They're going to talk to whoever. Hey, what's she out for? I don't know, but he said health related. And then they may still say, well, I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's this. She was looking a little funny the last couple staff meetings or whatever. But you have to talk to people like they're coming to you with a valid concern. They want to know something, and you give as much as you can.
Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
Cindy's got amazing surveys that measure not only things that you commonly want to measure, like how are the employees doing, how are they feeling about the direction of the company, what's the level of trust and approachability of the managers, and then kind of a term that's gotten popular lately, how much psychological safety we have. But also things like who's talking to whom, where are the communication blockages, and anything else that you think is a hotspot in your company, Cindy knows how to measure. And so we've for years done precise measurements to gauge the internal health of the company. Call us at Culture, CULSURE.com. The general arc of business in our short lifetime, and I'd like to think this is the way it's heading, is to become increasingly transparent.
Yes, but there are some serious limitations.
Absolutely. And you and I, we talk at great lengths about that and why we don't think that there should be radical transparency and you should have secrets. And agree with all of that. But if you ask your HR department or your lawyers what you can say, they're going to give you an inferior management response. And you shouldn't violate any kind of confidentiality that you can't give away. So we can't talk about exactly why we let this person go in this case, because it was an incident. We had this happen. We're not just making this stuff up. This happened very recently at a place where we work, where somebody who had decades at the company vanished like a puff of smoke overnight. Now, and I know why she vanished. And in the company of 100 people, maybe 4 other people do, 3 or 4 others. And they brought us in because we were consulting on this. And that's it. But her staff, which consisted of 25 people, they have no idea why she was there on a Thursday, put on leave on a Friday, and dismissed 2 Fridays later. She never came back to work. And they have no idea. And they'll never know because there was a confidentiality agreement signed that we're going to basically, they're going to let her go. She's going to be able to go on good terms and activate the pension, et cetera. Not fired for cause. She gets to resign. And on her end, she'll never talk about it. Never talk about the reason she was let go. Never talk about what happened. And that was mutual. And we had to facilitate a discussion with their 25 people because they're
worried about whether or not it's going to come for them. And, I mean, again, there are things that you can't say, but there are things that you can say. Like the things that you say when a recruiter calls and asks about an employee is, I would hire this person back. Yes, I would hire, you can say that. So this person disappeared and you can look at the staff and you can be like, listen, I can't tell you exactly what happened, but I will say they are in good standing and we would love to have them back.
Yeah. Or they're in good standing and don't worry, there is absolutely no danger that this is happening to anybody else on the team. This is not the beginning of a lot of disappearances. This was an incident and it worked best for both of us to move on or whatever. You have to tell them something. I mean, we facilitated the conversation. When I facilitated the conversation, basically what I did is with the employees, I'm like, look, there's a confidentiality agreement protecting this exit on both sides. Both these people wanted to do that. And so let's do a little mental exercise. And let's talk through all of the people who've left this company in the last 5 years. It's only 100 people. And so we did that exercise. So we made a list and there were probably, 16, 14, 15, something like that. A little bit more than 10 people. Not a ton. It's a relatively low turnover place, or a very low turnover place, I should say. And then for each person, there was a reason. Spouse got a job, retired, activated the pension or retired.
Went and got a degree and did something else. Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically it was like, is there anything on this list that strikes you as scary? No. Then what are the odds for this one? Well, not scary. And you let them draw, there's 100 ways you can.
I like that exercise.
Yeah. There's 100 ways you can skin the cat where basically for all the others, you know why. This one, you're not going to know. Why? Both parties signed a confidentiality. And I know that's going to send you to talking because that's normal. That's what people do. You're going, what happened? What did you hear? Did you hear whatever did you hear? And when you look at the span of recent history in this company doesn't disappear people. This just happened. Draw your own conclusions. But basically we can surmise that there was a reason. And that this doesn't portend anything us waking up in a month and somebody else being disappeared, with the chance being, obviously people's main concern that I'm going to get disappeared.
And I think that that's the focus is it's not that they don't care about their coworkers, because sometimes people care a great deal about their coworkers, but the anxiety in that moment is really, what does this mean for me?
Absolutely.
That's what you're trying to address.
And yeah, that's a huge piece. Yes, agree. And then in this instance, there's also all kinds of other stuff. They loved this person who got disappeared. And so there was a lot of loyalty. Anyway, I think this is a good example. Like the late, great Howard Prince, our mentor, told us, and I don't dislike lawyers. When you need them, you really need them. But their training.
And your sister is one.
And my sister is one. Yep. And their training is to say no. And so
the safest course is to do nothing.
Or to say no, you can't say that. And you cannot manage by lawyer and by HR. You have people you need to talk to, and within the limits of what you can say, you need to give people answers to reasonable questions. I get completely irritated by all the things HR won't let you do. And it's a detriment to managing. And I'm not anti-HR. I had a job as HR for a while. And companies need systems and processes. I understand that. But I can't talk about it is never an answer for a manager. You talk about all the things you can talk about to your people.
And so that was on the information sharing. If you are trying to tamp that down, because that's really a big spot for exactly the reasons that you started with on this conversation. You know, like if you are finding that there's gossip around information sharing and sense making, well, then that is a communication problem on your end, because you need to do the best that you can getting ahead of the gossip. So that way they're getting good information first or very early before like they really sink their teeth into something. Because they want to believe it. It's consistent with their previous beliefs. Like you want to get ahead of that as much as you can. And so that's the information component. The part where, it's more social bonding, that isn't actually a problem, right? Like we're okay with people social bonding over gossip as long as it doesn't have a negative outcome. Like as long as you're not bonding in hatred to somebody else who works in the organization.
Yeah, as long as it's not becoming too much in-group, out-group stuff.
Right. And so like, gossiping for social bonding, that may have a heavy value component. Like I'm gossiping so that way you know my values and you can assess whether or not I'm the kind of person that you want to have a relationship with. That's decent enough as long as the gossip around the values isn't coming at somebody else's expense. And so,
or it's not creating countercultural values.
Right. And so I think that's a good point. So for those two reasons, countercultural and coming at somebody else's expense. And so if you're seeing that it's skewing towards the negative, then, one of the remedies is help them actually bond. Like do other things that people can bond over. And so it may be more like social outings with the organization where you're making sure that like a mix of people, especially the people who are gossiped about, are present and protected enough where other people can start bonding with them. Because we find that when people actually start interacting with these people who have been like the source for the gossip, that gossip goes down.
As the knowledge goes up.
Right. And so, making an effort not to create the environment, but also making an effort to try to make it easier for the other people in the organization to bond with that person also helps to reduce some of the gossip that is going on. Things like putting them on the same team where they have the same goal. That's a binding component that supersedes. And so like it helps like the social bonding. And so like those are some of the things that like you can do to try to like tamp down on gossip that is spun negative. It's for social bonding, but it's spun negative either at somebody's expense or the organization's expense.
Makes sense. You gave the example of you gave both the social event and a
team event.
Put them on a team. What's your leaning on having people just get their bonding through work-related shared goals?
If you're not going to actually do something on those social events to help that person social bond, what's going to happen is the same old people are going to show up and they're going to stay in the same old groups. And we see this all the time in rural hospitals because
anywhere.
Well, but especially rural hospitals, rural communities. It's very hard to be the newcomer.
We see it in just another example. I think it's everywhere. You see it in fire departments as well.
But a lot of those are rural as well. And they're also structured where people have a group and then everybody outside that group is in our group.
Yeah. So the same people show up. Yeah. I mean, I think don't let me speak for you, but I think my view, and you can tell people if you share this, the most important thing you can do to bind people together, to bond them, to have them be cohesive, is to actually have them work together. Shared goal, meaningful work.
Yeah, there has to be interdependence, because if they're just working together,
you can't divide and conquer it.
Right.
It doesn't work to try to build your team and you give them a job and then they meet for 10 minutes and like, all right, you're in this part, you're in this part, you're in this part. They actually have to be able to sync. They have to actually figure this thing out together. Big chunks of it anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you also have to look at the layout of where people are doing the majority of their work. And so if you're people who are isolated socially, are remote in terms of like the layout of the office, another option is to move them.
Yeah, we were part of a company a number of times in our career where they move. And so they're getting new headquarters, they're changing office buildings, and it disrupts. You actually measured once in a fire department when they shifted everybody's daily work, where you show up to work. And there's a period of time where everybody's old behaviors, the old people they talk to, if they go back to that.
Right. I was in there 6 months after they did that. And like I couldn't make heads or tails out of the charts. And then we got in the room and they're like, because they could see it, because they're like, oh yeah, those are all the people who used to work together, bonded together. Yeah. So it is sticky, but there's also a lot of research that says if somebody is on a different floor or more than 50 feet away, I mean, I might not have the 50 feet right, but it was like a very small number of feet.
50 feet.
You might as
That's
well.
That's who you talk to, basically.
Right.
50 feet.
They might, if they're over that, they might as well be in Paris and you in the US because like you're just not, like you just talk to the people who are immediately around you.
Yeah, we had an organization that we worked for that went from an office building that was, low slung, single story and wide, to a 2-story. And they put basically one of their teams on the top, one on the bottom. And within 6 months, they weren't talking to each other. That had basically created 2 departments. So, I mean, all this stuff about who you talk to, all of it can be measured. It's called a social network analysis. Cindi does it. And, a lot of people do this kind of analysis. And we find some of the most amazing behavior. But again, it's going back to it's people talking to people. The title of this episode should be Gossip is Good, because it is. It's usually a very healthy sign.
It's people are engaged and they're trying to actually know what's going on so they can do their best. And they're trying to have good relationships with the people they work with because they want a positive work environment. Yeah. So like, those are some good things. It's just that when it gets out of whack.
All right. We talked about the information function,
the social bonding function, the part that's about people bonding or people gossiping because of the moral part. Like it's a mechanism by which they actually make the connection. It's like throwing out a sign that says, I'm this person. If you're a type of person.
Right. Sure.
And so mostly functional when like the example that you gave, like basically people were like, that is not who we are.
Yeah, this is crazy.
As a group.
How is this possible? Yeah.
And sort of reining it back in.
Yeah.
Dysfunctional if you're like using it to destroy one particular person, like it's over the line. Yeah. Dysfunctional if you're derailing an organization.
Not derailing, just if you're.
Oh, you can derail.
Yeah, but that's, in extremis, you're mostly.
I mean, we've had little fiefdoms.
Yeah.
Like a little group with a strong leader that just totally.
Yeah, we had.
Cohesive.
Yeah. I tell them my favorite story all the time is back, we were at a company that had a P.O. box and a lot of mail came in. And they had two warring sides of this company. And they had to send 2 people to the P.O. box, the same P.O. box. But if you were in group 1, you wouldn't pull any of group 2's mail out of the box. And group 2 wouldn't pull any of group 1's mail.
And that is an indication you might have a problem.
That place was rough. Yeah, I remember that was a tough job.
That was rough.
Yeah. That's like kind of where this podcast came from. Is a lot of times managers ask us how to tamp it down, gossip. How do we tamp down this gossip? And our basic view, in line with the reasons that we laid out here, is generally gossip is good. It's a healthy sign of an organization trying to talk its way through curveballs and points of confusion. And as a manager, our role is to help where we can. Sometimes we say, fill the hole, fill the gap in their knowledge when you can. And a lot of times you will be able to, and reassure them when you're able to reassure them that, look, things are going to be okay. I know this seems strange, but this isn't going to be a pattern. This was a one-off. There's reasons that we had to shut down that division or whatever. And we don't think that's going to spread. And when you're in those cases where it's all bad news, you tell people that too.
Right.
Yeah. I forget who did the study, but very, smartly done study of asking people if they think people want good news or bad news first. And most of the time people are fairly evenly split. Well, so they want the good news first or they want the bad news. But then the next question is, what do you want first? The good news or the bad news? And everybody always wants the bad news first. And so to me, it's one of my favorite studies because it's a reminder of the difference between what we think for others and what we think about ourselves, or what we want for ourselves. Even as it's obvious that a bunch of me's is them, right? And so if I want the bad news first, well, they're going to want the bad news first. I'm not some weirdo.
I think, to me, it makes me think of what you always called snivel gear.
Oh, yes.
Right. So snivel gear came from his military experience, where as long as you always had more layer to put on.
Never put it all on.
You'd never put it all on, because as long as you knew you always had that one extra layer, you always felt like
your life could always get better.
Yeah. And I think with good news, bad news, you want the bad news first because you know that there's this other thing that hopefully makes it feel a little bit better.
Yeah. What good is the good news if I know I've got the bad news coming?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes managers are in the position of having to tell them there's bad news and there's more on the way. And tell them that. A lot of times people just want to know, like you said earlier, what in the heck happened? You don't have to tell me everything, but get me a little better understanding, fill some of the gaps in my knowledge. And then, is this going to happen to me / us if it's a negative incident? And that's part of our job. Help people kind of think through that and make sense of it.
And even when it's uncertainty, especially when it's uncertainty, I think you actually have to ramp up the communication, even if the communication is, we are still figuring it out. This is where we're at today. This is where we think it's going.
Yeah.
But the situation is still evolving. Thank you for joining us today on Management Muse. We appreciate if you can leave some comments. In fact, that would be very helpful. And as always, following, subscribing on all the different platforms that you use. That's also wonderful. We appreciate it. We will see you the next time on Management Muse. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Christina, Sarah and Rebecca, and then of course everybody at Design at Work. And then just as a last minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.